Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Daled, and Mi'etz Hashem today we will be learning Daf Reish Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn the halachas of Iruv Chatzeros. We have some unfinished business left on Reish Mem Vav Amud Beis. We're holding on Reish Mem Vav Amud Beis, 4 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Shin Ayin Ches Sif Gimel. Our learning today should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanasunim Batzaru Bashivya, Ha'im Debein Bayom Bein Bayabasha, Hamakim Yerachim Alehem, V'Yetziam Yitzar L'Rvacha Me'afelu La'ira Mishibah L'Geula, Hashta Bagalo V'Zman Kariv and Amar Amen. Our learning should be a schus for Shalema for Achia Gadol Mashemer Ben Esther Fradel, Yitzchak Ben Zion Ben Dusha, Rivka Bashir Aleah, Chavadasa Bas Rezel Serel, Yeshua Levi ben Ahuva Malkachana, and for Yerucham ben Masha, they should all have a refuah shalema b'sayk shar chayle Yisrael. So, Sif Gimel is a sif that I find to be, I call it a very fun sif. It's one of those seifim where, again, we're going to take the rules that we've been discussing of Iruv Chatzeros in complex situations when you have two Chatzeros next to each other, and it's going to apply it to some interesting scenarios. We're going to have to do the math in each scenario, see what the halacha is, and of course, there's going to be a couple of chidushim sprinkled in over here. So, the background is that we are continuing to discuss the case of Shtei Chatzeros Zu Lifnim Mizu. Two Chatzeros, one behind the other. So we have Chatzer A and Chatzer B are next to each other. Chatzer A is the outer Chatzer. So there's an entrance and an exit to the Rishus Harabim. You go from the Rishus Harabim into Chatzer A. From Chatzer A, at the back, let's say, of Chatzer A, there's a doorway that goes into Chatzer B. But by Chatzer B, there's no through traffic. You can't get out from Chatzer B to the Rishus Harabim. You can't go anywhere from Chatzer B. The only way to get to the Rishus Harabim is to go from Chatzer B, the Chatzer HaPnimis, the inside Chatzer, go out through Chatzer A, and you can go through Chatzer A out to the Rishus Harabim. And right away we understand that one of the issues that brings up is that Chatzer B, the Chatzer HaPnimis, the inner Chatzer, has a Drisas HaRegel on Chatzer A. It has a right of way over the Chatzer HaChitzayna to get out to the Rishus Harabim. And that Drisas HaRegel sometimes creates problems. So now, let's take a look here at Sif Gimel. It says, essentially, we're going to have I break this Sif down into essentially 4 halachas, 4 main points. Let's see number 1. Says the Mechaber. Ervu b'yachad. Now, of course, I forgot to mention, since the Chatzer HaChitzayna and the Chatzer HaPnimis are joined by a doorway, you could go back and forth between them. Therefore, they have the option to join in a joint Iruv Chatzeros. They don't have to, but they can. Now we're going to assume that they did. Says the Mechaber, Ervu b'yachad, if the Chatzer HaChitzayna and the Chatzer HaPnimis joined in a joint Iruv Chatzeros, the Nasenu Eruvan Bachitzayna. The box of matzahs for the Erev was placed in the Chatzer HaChitzayna. So the mechanics of Iruv Chatzeros now say Chatzer HaChitzayna, Chatzer HaPnimis, one big happy family. They're all living, so to speak, in one of the batim, in one of the homes. Where? In the Chatzer HaChitzayna. So Ervu b'yachad, they make a joint Iruv Chatzeros v'nastu Eruvan b'chitzayna, and they place the box of matzahs, they place the Erev in the Chatzer HaChitzayna. But now, something went wrong. V'shachach echad, and somebody, one of the residents of the Chitzayna, the Pnimis, one of the residents, v'shachach echad, bein min ha-Pnimis, bein min ha-Chitzayna. One of the residents of the inner Chatzer, the outer Chatzer, forgot, v'lo yerev, and he never joined the Iruv Chatzeros. So somebody was left out of the Iruv Chatzeros. Says the Mechaber, Shtehen Asuros. In this case, both Chatzeros are going to be Aser. Nobody, not in the Chitzayna, not in the Pnimis, nobody is going to be allowed to transfer a Keli Sheshavas Babayis either to their Chatzer or to the other Chatzer. Nobody is going to be allowed to transfer from bias to bias. Both of the Chatzeros are going to be Aser. So this is going to be halacha number 1 here of Sif Gimel. You have the Chatzer Chitzayna, the Chatzer HaPnimis. They tried to join in a joint Iruv Chatzeros. Somebody got left out of the Erev. Says the Mechaber, it doesn't matter if that person lived in the Chatzar HaChitzayna or he lived in the Chatzar HaPnimis. If somebody got left out of the Eruv Chatzeros, the whole Eruv is batal. Both Chatzeros are going to be aser. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Katan Yudalid, where the Chavetz Chaim does such a beautiful and masterful job of doing the math for us. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Shtei and Asurais. Why? Let's see. She'em ha'shecheach hu echad min ha'pnibis. Let's say the person who got left out lived in the Chatzar HaPnimi. Well, figure it out. That means that the Chatzar HaPnimi certainly was not joined into one group, right? The Chatzar HaPnimi now certainly serves multiple entities. There's, let's say, the 3 units of the Pnimi that gave to the Eruv. There's the 1 unit in the Pnimi that did not give to the Eruv. So the Chatzar HaPnimi is definitely serving multiple entities, and they're aser. Now, once the Chatzar HaPnimi is aser, they're a regel ha'asura bimkaima. If they're a regel ha'asura bimkaima, then they aser on the chitzayna. Regel ha'asura bimkaima, oiseres, on the other chatzar. They have a drisus a regel on the other chatzar, so they're going to aser. Just looking for the exact lashon. Okay, whatever it is. All right, they're a regular asur b'mkarba. They're going to aser. So that's the first thing that the Mishnah Berurah says over here. Nice cut in Yudalid. She'em ha'sheichach u'echad ben ha'pnimis. If the person that got left out of the Eruv Chatzeros lived in the Pnimis, bevadai oiser ala chitzayna, then certainly the Pnimis itself is aser, and certainly they're going to aser on the chitzayna kevan she'oiser b'mekaymai. Since they're a regular asura b'mekayma, they aser on the chitzayna where they have a drisus regel. Va'afilu ma'shechech ben hachitzayna. Now let's say the person who forgot is in the chitzayna. All right, let's do the math here for a second. The person who forgot is in the chitzayna. So the chitzayna is now definitely serving multiple entities, and the chitzayna is definitely aser. But how about the pnimis? Everybody in the pnimis was successfully joined into one group. So why can't the pnimis now go ahead and say, you know what? We want to close our door. We don't want anybody from the chitzayna coming into our chutzner. They don't have a drisus regel on us. There's no through traffic through our chutzner. So we want to close the door, and we want to cut ourselves off from the chitzayna. Our 4 units have all been successfully joined into one group by virtue of the Eruv Chatzeros. So we have a good Eruv Chatzeros. Problem is that the chitzayna don't. So fine, we'll cut ourselves off for the chitzayna. We should be mutter. You can't do that. Why can't they do that? Because where's their Eruv? Their Eruv is in the chitzayna. So if they're cutting themselves off on the chitzayna, they have no Eruv. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Even if the person who got left out of the Eruv Chatzeros lived in the chitzayna, az hachitzayna v'adei asura. You understand right away that the chitzayna is asur, it's serving multiple entities. But v'gam ha'pnimis asura. But the pnimis is also asur, av she'ein la chitzayna drisus haregel aleh. Even though the chitzayna has no drisus haregel on the pnimis is still asur. Tekevan she'ervu yachad. Because since they made a joint Eruv Chatzeros and they put the Eruv in the chitzayna, harehi k'moshe dara b'chitzayna. So now it's as if they live in the chitzayna. So high level, what the Mishnah Berurah is saying is, first of all, the reason the pnimis is aser is because, what do you mean you're successfully joined in an Eruv Chatzeros? Not really. By making a joint Eruv Chatzeros together with the chitzayna, you became one big group. And one member of the group did not enter into the Eruv Chatzeros. So high level, it's not true that you are a successfully unified group in your chutzner, because you expanded your chutzner to include the chitzayna, and one of the chitzaynas got left out. High level. But then, says the Chavetz Chaim, and it would not help for the Chatzar HaPnimis to say, you know what, we'll close our door. Fine, we tried to expand ourselves to incorporate the chitzayna together with us. Fine, we're backing out of that deal. We'll close our door. The chitzayna doesn't have a drisus regel on us. We'll now declare we'll secede. We'll declare ourselves independent. And l'chayra, we have a good Eruv Chatzeros. Says the Chavetz Chaim, no. because they don't have their Erev in their Chatzar. The Erev is in the Chitzaina. So once they cut themselves off from the Chitzaina, no more Erev. You have to be living where the Erev is. If you cut yourself off from the Erev, you have no Erev. Okay, so that was halacha number 1. So just to very succinctly wrap it up, halacha number 1, the Chitzaina, the Pnimis, they tried to join in a joint Eruv Chatzeros. One resident of either Chatzar did not join the Erev. Everybody is going to be Aser. That's it. They're all Aser. And we understand why. But now, says the Mechaber, there is an Eitzah. There is a way to fix the situation. What's that? Ad sheyevatel reshusai. The person that got left out could be mevatel his reshus to everybody else. And again, what does it mean to be mevatel reshus? The person that got left out, Ruvain, who lives in unit number 1 in the Pnimis. Ruvain, who lives in unit number 1 in the Pnimis, will say, I'm causing trouble for everybody. Why? Because I am a separate entity. I have reshus in the Chatzeros, and my reshus in the Chatzeros is becoming a separate entity that's answering on everybody else. I'm going to be mevatel reshus. I'm being mesalik myself. I'm giving up my rights to the Chatzer. If he's mevatel reshus, then everybody is going to become mutter again. But now the Mishnah Berurah says, realize what that means. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ice Cotton Tezvav, Ad sheyevatel reshusai, he has to be mevatel reshus. Ritzoner Lomar, what the Mechaber means is lishtei hakatzeros. He has to be mevatel reshus to the bnei hachatzer in both chatzeros. If you do the math, it's very simple. Let's say he lived in the Pnimi. So if he lives in the Pnimi, the first thing he has to do is he has to be mevatel reshus to the other people in the Pnimi, so that the Pnimi is not serving multiple entities. He backs away. He gives up his reshus in the Pnimis. Is that enough? No. Because he has a drisas haregel in the Chitzaina. Since he lives in the Pnimi, he has a drisas haregel through the Chitzaina. Now he, Ruvain, in unit number 1 in the Pnimi, even when he's mevatel reshus to the other pnimis, he is still not allowed to take a keli sheshavas babayis in his house and take it out to his chotzer, because he's mevatel his reshus on the chotzer. He's not mevatel the reshus on his house. So his house is still a separate entity. The chotzer is not serving his house. That's why the pnimi is okay, because till now we looked at it that there are 4 units in the Pnimi. The Chatzar is serving all 4 units. We have to solve that by joining them in an Eruv Chatzeros. But once Ruvain in unit number 1 is mevatel his reshus in the Chatzar is not serving 4 units. It's only serving 3. Once those 3 combine in Eruv Chatzeros, they're all good. This guy, Ruvain in unit number 1, his house is a separate entity from the rest of the Chatzar. And the Chatzar doesn't serve him. But he can't take a keli sheshavas in his house and take it out to the Chatzar. Once that's true, he is a regel ha'asura b'mkaima. He is also in his Chatzar. His drisas regel through the Chitzaina would asa the Chitzaina. So first he has to be mevatel reshus to the Pnimi. Then he has to be mevatel his right of way. He has to be mevatel his right of drisas regel through the Chitzaina to the Chitzaina. If he lives in the Chitzaina, so he has to be mevatel reshus to the Chitzaina, but that's not enough. He also has to be mevatel reshus to the Pnimi. Why? He doesn't have a drisas regel through the Pnimi. Yeah, but everybody's been expanded to be one big happy family. If everybody's been expanded to be one happy family, it's not enough for him to be mevatel reshus to the people of his Chatzar. He has to be mevatel reshus to the people of the newly expanded Chatzar as well. So he's got to be mevatel reshus to both Chatzeros. That's what I'm calling halacha number 2 of Siv Gimel, the eitzah of how to rectify the situation when one person got left out of the Erev. Okay. Now let's go to halacha number 3. Till now we were talking about a case where was the box of matzahs put? The box of matzahs was put in the Chitzaina, in the Pnimi. Now, in the Chitzaina. Right, in the Chitzaina. Now we're going to talk about what if the Erev was placed in the Pnimi. That's going to make some differences. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'im nastu eruvan ba'pnimis. Let's say they tried to join in a joint Eruv Chatzeros, and the box of matzahs was put in the Pnimi. So officially now, everybody kind of lives in the Pnimi. V'shakach echad min hapnimis v'loy erev. Somebody in the Pnimi forgot to join the Eruv Chatzeros. Shtei and Asuros. Again, both Chatzeros are going to be Aser. Says the Mishnah Berurah. So the first thing that the Mishnah Berurah tells us is high level. The reason everybody is Aser, because what do you mean? They're all considered to be one Chatzer, right? By expanding and joining into one joint Eruv Chatzeros. So right away, the first problem is going to be, hello, one person forgot to join the Erev. So this newly expanded Chatzer, the Pnimi and the Chitzayna, somebody got left out. That's high level. Now, we're going to see that there's a potential Eitzah here. Says the Mishnah Berurah, again, Oiskat Desai, the Kechad HaChashiva, Im lo yisheyevatel reshusai l'shnei hakatzeros. The Eitzah would be, that the Mechaber didn't speak out, the Eitzah would be that this fellow inside the Pnimis should be mevatel reshus, again, to both Chatzeros. He should be mevatel reshus to the Pnimi, so he rectifies the Pnimi, right? But he still has to be mevatel reshus to the Chitzayna, so he shouldn't be a regular Iseres b'mekayma that answers with his drisas regel on the Chatzer. Aval im yevatel rakel b'nei Pnimi loy mahani. Now here's the interesting piece of this Mishnah Berurah. Again, they tried to join in a joint Eruv Chatzeros. They put the box of matzahs in the Pnimi. One guy in the Pnimi forgot to join the Eruv Chatzeros. Everybody is Aser. The Pnimi is Aser. One guy in the Pnimi got left out. The Chitzayna is Aser. That guy, even he's regular Iseres b'mekayma, or the whole Pnimi right now is a regular Iseres b'mekayma. They're going to Aser on the Chitzayna as well. Okay, fine. He'll be mevatel reshus. Who does he have to be mevatel reshus to? First, he has to be mevatel reshus to the Pnimi, to rectify the Pnimi. But then he has to be mevatel reshus on his drisas regel to the Chitzayna, to rectify the Chitzayna. Says the Mishnah Berurah, hold it. Let's say he's mevatel reshus to the Pnimi, and he's not mevatel reshus to the Chitzayna. So think about it for a minute. Where's the Erev? In the first halach of Sif Gimel, the Erev was in the Chitzayna. But now the Erev is in the Pnimi. So let's say he's mevatel reshus to the Pnimi, and he's not mevatel his reshus on the drisas regel to the Chitzayna. Okay, the Pnimi is okay. He was mevatel reshus to the Pnimi. He's in unit number 1. The Chatzer is now serving 1, 2, and 3. They joined in a Eruv Chatzeros, and the box of matzahs is by them. So let them close the door, cut off the Chitzayna. The Chitzayna is Aser, because the Chitzayna doesn't have any Eruv Chatzeros. But the Pnimi, why is the Pnimi Aser? Everybody in the Pnimi should be mutter, except for this guy who forgot to join the Erev, but he was mevatel reshus. Right? So everybody should be okay in the Pnimi except for him. Doesn't that seem to work? Says the Mishnah Berurah, that doesn't work. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Avalim Yavatel Rakel Bnei Pnimi. If this guy, Ruvain, in unit number 1 in the Pnimi, is mevatel reshus, but he's only mevatel reshus to the other Pnimis, loy mahani. That's not going to work. Afilu em yirtzu lehistalik me'achitzayna v'liskar pischa. Even if what the Pnimi want to do is, the Pnimi want to turn around and say, we're going to close our door, Chitzaynim, you have no drisas regel through us, right? So you're not going to aser on us, and we're good. We have an Eruv Chatzeros. Says the Mishnah Berurah, it doesn't work. Now, notice the Mishnah Berurah doesn't say why it doesn't work. But if you go to the Sharitzia and Ois Kat Gimel, the Mishnah Berurah makes a very cryptic statement. Says the Mishnah Berurah Ois Kat Gimel, says the Sharitzia and Ois Kat Gimel, Ivus Bamehem, since the Avla, since the problem was created by the Pnimis, it's one of the guys in the Pnimi who forgot to join the Erev, so the problem over here is emanating from the Pnimi. The Pnimi cannot cut themselves off from the Chitzayna and say, we have an Erev, you don't, haha. Now, very cryptic, what does it mean? We're going to wait for a moment to see what it means, because really we have to see the next Mishnah Berurah to get the context and understand what it means. But for that, we have to go into halacha number 4, the final halacha of Siv Gimel. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the last word, second line from the bottom, Aval. So again, We're talking about the same case. They tried to join in an Eruv Chatzeros. The box of matzah is in the Chatzer HaPnimis. Till now, we spoke about a guy in the Pnimi forgot to join the Eruv. Shtei and Asuras. Says the Mishnah Berurah, let's say one guy in the Chitzayna forgot to join the Eruv. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah, Pnimis Muteris. If the Eruv is located in the Chatzer HaPnimi, and all 4 units in the Chatzer HaPnimi joined the Eruv, the only problem is they tried to join in a joint Eruv Chatzeros with the Chitzayna, and one guy in the Chitzayna forgot to join the Eruv. It's all right. Close the door between the Pnimis and the Chitzayna. The Chitzayna doesn't have a Drisas Regel on the Pnimis. Everybody in the Pnimis joined the Eruv Chatzeros. The box of matzah is by them. Fine. Close the door. Cut themselves off on the Chitzayna. The Pnimis is good. They're sitting pretty. They have an Eruv Chatzeros. The Chitzayna, sorry Charlie, for this Shabbos you have no Eruv Chatzeros. So again, in the third halacha and in the fourth halacha, we're talking about the same essential case. In both cases, the Chitzayna, the Pnimis, tried to join in a joint Eruv Chatzeros, and the box of matzah is located in the Pnimi. One guy forgot to join the Eruv. Question is, where does that guy live? If he lives in the Pnimi, then no good. Everybody is going to be Aser. If he lived in the Pnimi, everybody's going to be Aser. Why is everybody going to be Aser? Because the Pnimi is Aser, and they have a Drisas Regel on the Chitzayna. Regel or Iseres B'mkoima, they're going to Aser on the Chitzayna. Okay, he'll go ahead and he'll be Mavatal Rishus. Yeah, if he's Mavatal Rishus to both Chatzeros, that could work. If he's Mavatal Rishus to both Chatzeros, the Pnimi is good, except for him. The Chitzayna is okay, because there's no regular Surah Iseres B'mkoima that's going to Aser on the Chitzayna, because that guy was Mavatal his Rishus. But if he's Mavatal Rishus only to the Pnimi, it doesn't work, said the Mishnah Berurah. Why? Because even though the Pnimi is good, right? L'chayra, they're good. He was Mavatal Rishus to the rest of the Pnimi, and they could close their door and cut themselves off on the Chitzayna. No, doesn't work. Why? Because the Ivus, the problem emanates from them. They don't get to close themselves off the Chitzayna. In the second case, where the guy who forgot was in the Chitzayna, in that case, the Pnimis is okay. Then they can close the door and say, we're cutting ourselves off from you, and we should be okay. What's the difference between the two? Says the Mishnah Berurah Cut Yud Zayin. Pnimis Muteris. In this last case, where the guy who forgot to join the Eruv was in the Chitzayna, so the Chitzayna is Aser, but the Pnimis is good, because they closed the door. Says the Mishnah Berurah, why are they good? Because in this case, they could cut themselves off from the Chitzayna, and they could say, we have a good Eruv. We all joined in an Eruv, and our Eruv is by us, so we're good. We closed the door, you don't ask around us, you don't have a Drisas Regel. They closed the door, and they could be mishtamish. They could go from their houses to the Chatzer, and vice versa. Because they have the Eruv by them. Even though their intent was to join and make one big Chatzer with the Chitzayna, and that Eruv fell apart because one guy in the Chitzayna didn't join, so you might think that that guy should Aser on them. He doesn't Aser on them. They could now change the deal. They could back out of the deal, the Loimarla, and tell the people in the Chitzayna, litekune shetaftich v'loy lavusi. Hello, when I agreed, me, the Pnimis, when I agreed to become incorporated with you, the Chitzayna, in one large Eruv Chatzeros, I did it so it should benefit me. I did it so that I should gain out of the deal. I didn't do it so that I should lose. I didn't do it so that if one of your klutzes forgets to join the Eruv Chatzeros, it's going to bring down my whole Eruv. So now that one of your guys messed up and forgot to join the Eruv, I'm closing the door. I have a good Eruv. We all join. The Eruv is by us. We have a good Eruv. We could go outside to the Chutzah with our Pirkei Avos, and we can have a beautiful Pirkei Avos drasha. You guys got a problem, but we're backing out of the deal. When we made this deal and we agreed to incorporate together, We didn't do it so that we should suffer from one of your guys forgetting to join the Erev. So that applies in Halacha 4. But it does not apply in Halacha 3. So just again to understand, the issue is, why can't you do the same thing in Halacha 3 when one guy in the Pnimi forgot to join the Erev? Let that guy be Mevatel Rishus just to the Pnimi. Let the Pnimi close the door and tell the Chitzayna, we don't want you to aser on us. Like this, you're asering on us. Because if our guy is not Mevatel Rishus to you, well, we tried to incorporate in one big Erev. He's a separate entity from you, so he asers on everybody. Why? Close the door. Close the door. He'll still aser on the Chitzayna because of his Drisas Regel, and he's a Regel Oiseres B'mkaima, so he'll still aser on the Chitzayna. But why does he aser on the Pnimi? Why does he aser on the Pnimi? The answer is very lumdish. The answer is that since, like the Sharetzion says, Achar she'ivus b'mehem, the way the Achronim want to explain this is, we always say that the Chitzayna does not have a Drisas Regel on the Pnimis. Now, high level, the reason that's true is because there's no through traffic through the Pnimis. There's through traffic through the Chitzayna. So we understand that the Bnei Pnimis always have to go through the Chitzayna. So they have a Drisas Regel through the Chitzayna. The Chitzayna don't have a Drisas Regel through the Pnimis. There's nowhere to go. But think about it. Why are they joining in a joint Eruv Chatzeres? They're joining in a joint Eruv Chatzeres because for some reason, the people of the Pnimis and the people of the Chitzayna want to be able to go back and forth to each other. So that means that for some reason, the Bnei Chitzayna want to come into the Pnimis. Maybe that's where the Pirkei Avos Drush is, in the Chutz of the Pnimis. Maybe that's where there's a big Kiddush, and people want to be able to bring herring from the Chitzayna over to the Pnimis. But for some reason, for whatever reason, they tried to join in a joint Eruv Chatzeres so that there should be a Drisas Regel, even from the Chitzayna into the Pnimis. Therefore, what they say is that there's a hergel. The people in the Chitzayna get used to coming into the Pnimis. And that does constitute some level of a Drisas Regel. How strong is that Drisas Regel? How much power are we going to give that Drisas Regel to allow the Chitzayna to aser on the Pnimis? Well, it depends. In halacha number 3, the ivus, the fault, is by the Pnimis. One guy in the Pnimis forgot to join the Erev. If one guy in the Pnimis is the guy who messed up, then we say, listen, you caused the problem. You don't get to close the door and cancel out the Drisas Regel that the Chitzayna was used to having on the Pnimis, and therefore, you can't say, I'm closing the door, the Chitzayna doesn't aser on me. But in Sif Yud Zayin, like the Mishnah Berurah says, when the fault emanates from the Chitzayna, when the fault is emanating from them, then the Pnimis could turn around and the Pnimis could use the argument, look, the only reason I tried to join with you was to help me, not to hurt me. That's the only reason I tried to join. Now you're hurting me? I'm not mechuyev to let you hurt me. In the first case, the Chitzayna is not hurting the Pnimis. It's the Pnimis that's hurting the Pnimis. What's hurting the Pnimis is that one of their guys failed to join the Erev. And he is the source. He's the source of the problem that now people are asering on each other. In that case, you don't get to say, I'm cutting myself off because you're hurting me. No, the problem's coming from within you. The problem is not coming from me. Okay, that brings us to the end of this beautiful Sif Gimel, and now we have to move along to Sif Daled. Sif Daled, says the Mechaber, Im Yachid Dar Bapnimis, the Yachid Bachitzayna. Again, we have the same case. We have the Chatzar Pnimis, the Chatzar Chitzayna. Let's say there's only one house in the Pnimis, and there's only one house in the Chitzayna. Now, a Chatzar that only has one house in it doesn't need in a Eruv Chatzeres, right? Or Shnayim Bachitzayna, or let's say the Chatzar Chitzayna does have two houses in it, but the Ervu and the two houses in the Chitzayna made in Eruv Chatzeris together. So again, in the two cases that we have here, in scenario number one, you have the Chatzar Chitzayna, the Chatzar Pnimis. Each one only has one resident, only one house. So neither one of them is required to make an Eruv Chatzeris. And they have a wall separating them with a doorway. They're not required to make it a Eruv Chatzeris together. If they want to, they can. If they don't want to, they don't have to. In the second scenario, again, the Chatzar Pnimis only has one resident. The Chatzar Chitzayna has two. If the Chatzar Chitzayna wants to be able to transfer from their batim to their Chatzar, from the Chatzar to their batim, from one house to the other, they need an Eruv Chatzeris, right? So they went ahead and they made an Eruv Chatzeris. Now, in both of these cases, the Chatzar, the Chitzayna, and the Pnimis did not join together in a joint Eruv Chatzeris. And in both of these cases, essentially, halachically, each Chatzar only has one entity. In the first case, both Chatzeris only have one house. In the second case, the Chitzayna has two houses, but they made it a Eruv Chatzeris. So again, they're one entity. So in both of these cases, the Chatzar HaPnimis, the Chatzar Chitzayna, each only have one entity. They're separated by a wall with a door. They don't want to make it a Eruv Chatzeris. They don't have to. Says the Mechaber, Ein HaYochid SheBePnimis Oiser Ala Chitzayna. The point of this sif is to tell you very simply that if the Pnimis is only one entity, so then the Pnimis does not need an Eruv Chatzeris, and therefore the Pnimis is a Regel Hamuteres Bimkaima. That single resident of the Pnimis is mutter in his Chatzar, and since he's a Regel Hamuteres Bimkaima, his Drisas a Regel on the Chitzayna does not answer the Chitzayna. That's what the Mechaber is coming to tell us here. Says the Ramah Haga, V'hu adin rabim shehim ki yachid ve'enam tzrichim la'arev k'derech shenisbar la'el simin shenayin. The same halacha would be true if there's a rabim, if there's more than one resident living in the Pnimis, let's say, but they're not a group that is required to make it a Eruv Chatzeris because they're considered one entity. We had cases like that back in Siman Shenayin. One case would be you have a father and his children living together in a Chatzar, and the father is supplying the children with all their meals. They eat by him. They're considered one entity, so they don't need an Eruv Chatzeris. They're one entity. They're a Regel Hamuteres B'Mekayma even without an Eruv Chatzeris. They're not going to aser on the Chitzayna. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Yud Ches, Oy Shnayim B'Chitzayna Ve'ervu. Hainu, Oy Sabashnayim Levad. In that second scenario of the Mechaber, in this case, there were two residents in the Chitzayna, but they joined together in an Eruv Chatzeris. He's just pointing out that Oishnayim Bachitzayna Ve'ervu, there are two residents of the Chitzayna, and they made a joint Eruv Chatzeris. That word Ve'ervu is going on the two residents in the Chitzayna. They made an Eruv Chatzeris so that the Chitzayna has an Eruv Chatzeris. It does not mean that the Chatzar and the Pnimis were ma'ariv together. They didn't enter into a joint Eruv Chatzeris. Vashmi'inon bazeh. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what's the chiddush of the second scenario? Scenario number one, there's one resident in the Pnimis, there's one resident in the Chatzar. You're telling me that the Pnimis doesn't answer on the Chitzayna because he's a regular Muteres B'Mkaima. Now you're giving me another scenario. Oh, there are two in the Chitzayna, but they joined in a Eruv Chatzeris. Okay, why is that a bigger chiddush? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Vashmi'inon bazeh, Deloy Temi, you do not say, the Gazerinon, that maybe we would make a Gzeira. Maybe in this case, where there are two in the Chitzayna, and they join in a Eruv Chatzeris, maybe in that case we'll say that the Pnimis should aser on the Chitzayna. Why? Why? He's only one person. He's a regular Muteres B'Mkaima. He doesn't need an Eruv Chatzeris. Why would he aser on the Chitzayna? Because of a Gzeira. What's the Gzeira? Maybe sheyizberu, people will look and they'll say, oh, there's two residents in the Chitzayna, sheyizberu sheyesh shnayim b'pnimis kemoi b'chitzayna. People from the outside, they know that there are two houses in the outer Chatzar. They're thinking, oh, there's probably also two houses in the inner Chatzar. And we see that the inner Chatzar is not asering on the outer Chatzar. oh, it must be that even a regel hoiseres b'mekayma doesn't aser. But that's not true. If there would be two in the primus, and they don't have any Ruva Chatzeros, they would aser on the Chitzayna. So when we make a Gzera, v'nava lahata gam bazer, v'hasa b'vadei aser midina to have a regular aser b'mkayma. If there indeed would be two residents in the primus, they would aser on the Chitzayna, because there would be a regel ha'asura b'mkayma. It's got your test. Ein ha'yachid sheb'pnimis, the one living in the primus doesn't aser on the Chitzayna. Ritzayna Larma, the Mechaber wants to say is, af shalei ervu yachad, even though the Pnimis and the Chitzayna did not make a joint Iruve Chatzeros, the Pnimis does not aser on the Chitzayna. The Pnimis has a Drisas a regel through the Chitzayna. That's not a problem. Why? Because he's a regel. Hamuteres b'mkayma. Ritzayna loyma af shalei ervu yachad. The regel hamuteres b'mkayma eino iseres shaloi b'mkayma. Since the single resident of the Pnimis is a regel hamuteres b'mkayma without an Iruv Chatzeres, he doesn't need one. His Drisas a regel on the Chitzayna does not aser the Chitzayna. The Ramah said the same halacha is true when you have a rabbim. You have more than one resident in the Chatzar, but there are rabbim that's like a yochid. Even though there are rabbim, they're still a single entity. Says the Mishnah Berurah Kadchaf, rabbim shem ki yochid. Hainu, for example, shahayu ba'pnimis ha'av im banav. Let's say living in the pnimis is a father and his children. So maybe you have a father and there are 4 kids. The father has 1 house, the 4 kids have 4 houses, so there's 5 houses in the Pnimis. There are rabbim, but there are rabbim that's like a yochid, shemekabel mimenu pras. They receive all of their food from him. We could see other similar cases in Shenayin when you could have a rabbim that is considered a single entity. Again, if that's what's in the Pnimis, they're a regel hamuteres b'mkayma even without an Eruv Chatzeros, and therefore they would not aser shaloi b'mkayma. Their drisas a regel on the Chitzayna would not aser the Chitzayna. Wow, that brings us to the end of Shenayin Ches. Let's move along to Shenayin Tes. Dine Chatzeros ubatim beinehem uboy beis sifim. Oh, I was going to make a diagram, and I didn't. So we're going to have to describe this without a diagram. The halacha of 2 Chatzeros, and there are houses situated, multiple houses situated between the 2 Chatzeros and linking the 2 Chatzeros. Uboy beis seifim. Here we have 2 seifim. So here's the scenario. You have Chatzer A. Chatzer A has 2 houses in it. So Chatzer A is a bona fide Chatzer in the context of halachas of Eruv Chatzeros. Chatzer A needs in Eruv Chatzeros for the residents of Chatzer A to be allowed to transfer a kelim sheshavsu babayis from the houses to the Chatzer, kelim sheshavsu b'Chatzer from the Chatzer to the houses, between the houses, Chatzer, serving multiple entities, they needed a Eruv Chatzeros. That's Chatzer A. Then there's Chatzer B. Chatzer B is the same thing. Chatzer B also has 2 or more houses in it. Now there's an area between Chatzer A and Chatzer B. Chatzer A and Chatzer B are not right alongside each other. What's located between Chatzer A and Chatzer B? A row house. There's 3 row houses that run from Chatzer A to Chatzer B. So right alongside Chatzer A, there's a house. And there's a doorway from Chatzer A into that house. Then right alongside that house, there's another house. And there's a doorway from house number 1 into house number 2. And right alongside house number 2 is house number 3. And there's a doorway from house number 2 into house number 3. House number 3 is right alongside Chatzer B. And there's a doorway from house number 3 going into Chatzer B. So Chatzer A, Chatzer B, 3 houses in between them. And there are doors that connect everything. You could go from a door from Chatzer A into house number 1, a door from house number 1 to house number 2 in the middle, a door from house number 2 in the middle to house number 3, and a door from house number 3 into Chatzer B. That's the scenario that we're talking about here. Says the Mechaber, a very interesting thing, and I'm going to have to point out a couple of words that are a little bit between the lines that the Mechaber doesn't really spell out. Grammatically, it's spelled out, but the Mechaber doesn't spell it out clearly. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph. Shtei Chatzeros. You have 2 Chatzeros, each one with multiple residents. Ushloisha batim beinehem. And there are 3 houses There's a row of 3 houses in between the 2 chatzeros and connecting the 2 chatzeros. And they're psuchim zeh lo zeh. Everything is opened up one to the other. Like I said, Chatzer A has a door to go into house number 1. House number 1 has a door to go into house number 2. House number 2 has a door to go into house number 3. House number 3 has a door to go into Chatzer B. V'roitzim la'arev yachad. And now, Chatzer A and Chatzer B want to join in a joint Eruve Chatzeres. Now, there is access, right? You need access from Chatzer A to Chatzer B in order to be able to join in a joint Eruve Chatzeres. Well, they have access. How? Going through the 3 houses in the middle. They have access. So they can join in a joint Eruve Chatzeres. That's not the Chiddush of this Sif. We have yet to see the Chiddush of this Sif. Says the Mechaber, how could you make the Eruv? Here's a cute shtick, says the Mechaber, how you could make the Eruv. Now remember, in order to make an Eruv between 2 Chatzeres, what's going to happen? Everybody in Chatzer A is going to join in Pas. So they're going to join in a box of matzahs. They're going to take their joint box of matzahs and they're going to put it somewhere together with Chatzer B's Pas. They're all going to join together in Pas. So Chatzer A is going to collect Pas. Chatzer B is going to collect Pas. They're going to put all their Pas together in one location. Says the Mechaber, here's how you could do it. Chatzer Zeh, Chatzer A, Ba Derech Bayis She'etzloi. Let's say Chatzer A has 2 houses in it. So Reuben and Shimon and Chatzer A will take matzah. They'll take their pas. And now they will, ba derech bayis she'etzloi, they'll go through house number 1 that adjoins their Chatzer, v'noisen eruvai bebayis she'be'emtza, and they'll put their pas in house number 2, in the middle house. Now, you have to be very careful to read the Mechaber very carefully and recognize what the Mechaber just said. The Mechaber said, how are they going to make the Eruv? Let's read carefully. Chatzer Zeh, this Chatzer, Chatzer number 1. Who lives in Chatzer number 1? 2 people, Reuben and Shimon. There are 2 houses. Chatzer Zeh, this Chatzer, nobody else. This Chatzer, Reuben and Shimon from this Chatzer, will take their Eruv. Chatzer Zeh ba derech bayis she'etzloi. They're going to, they're going to take their Eruv. So that means Reuven and Shimon, nobody else. Reuven and Shimon are going to join in an Eruv. They're going to take their Eruv from their Chatzer through house number 1 that opens to their Chatzer, and they're going to bring it to house number 2, which is the middle house. And they're going to deposit their pas in the middle house, in house number 2. Let's go weiter. V'chein oisa hashniya. The second Chatzer, Chatzer B, is going to do the same thing. What does that mean? That means that Levi and Yehuda live in Chatzer B. Levi and Yehuda, nobody else, are going to join in their pas. They're going to take their pas through house number 3, that's right next to them, and they're going to deposit their pas in the middle house. What's the halacha? Umutarim bishloshtan. Now, everybody's going to be mutter in everything. By doing this, by Reuben and Shimon and Chatzer A taking their pas and putting it, going through house number 1, depositing it in house number 2, Levi and Yehudi and Chatzer B taking their pas, going through house number 3 and depositing it in house number 2, they have now linked. They all, live in house number 2. And now, they're muteres b'shloshtan. Both Chatzer A, Chatzer B are mutter in all 3 middle houses. Now, here's the interesting thing. We've covered Reuben and Shimon. We've covered Levi and Yehuda. But there are 3 houses in the middle. The 3 houses in the middle are Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Now, we didn't talk about Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov joining the Eruv, did we? No. We said the people from this Chatzer, Reuben and Shimon, take their pas, bring it through house number 1, deposit it in house number 2. Levi and Yehuda from Chatzer B, they take their pas, they take it through house number 3, deposit in house number 2. Everybody's mutter. How about Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? We don't see that they made a contribution. The answer is that they didn't. They're not mechuyev to make a contribution, and yet their houses are considered part of the Eruv. Everybody's all one happy family. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, all one happy family. Everybody's muteres everywhere. How did that happen? What happened to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? Well, Yitzchak, house number 2, the middle house, we could easily understand. Why? Think about it a minute. You got it? Yeah. Because house number 2 is the Bayis Shemanichim B'Erev. The house that the Erev goes into never has to make a contribution to the Erev, because everybody's saying that they live in that house. Well, Yitzchak does live in that house. So house number 2 we get right away. It's the Bayis Shemanichim B'Erev. How about Avrami and Yitzchak? How come they don't have to make a contribution to the Erev? The answer is Avram and Yitzchak are a Beis Shar. Remember a Beis Shar, the gatehouse at the opening of a chutzner that everybody walks through? The Beis Shar doesn't have to make a contribution to the Erev, even if somebody lives in the Beis Shar. You're also not allowed to put the Erev in a Beis Shar, right? But the Beis Shar doesn't have to make a contribution to the Erev. Says the Mechaber, house number 1 and house number 2 are a Beis Shar. House number 1 is the Beis Shar for Chatzar A. House number 3, not 2. House number 1 that's alongside Chatzar A is the Beis Shar to Chatzar A. House number 3 that's alongside Chatzar B is the Beis Shar to Chatzar B. So you've got Chatzar, Beis Shar, Bayis Shemanichim B'Erev, Beis Shar, Chatzar. So the 2 Chatzeros have to contribute to the Erev. The 2 Batei Shar do not, and the Bayis Shemanichim B'Erev also does not. Let's now see it inside as one cohesive sif in the Mechaber. So you had Shtei Chatzeros u'shloisha batim b'neim psuchim zeh lezeh v'roitzim l'arav yachat. Chatzer zeh ba derech bayis she'etzle v'nois eruva b'bayis she'be'emtza v'chei nois ha'shniya u'mutarim b'shloshtan. Why? She'kol bayis she'etzel ha'chatzer, each house that's right adjoining the chatzer, so that's house number 1 and house number 3, choshev loy k'beis shar, is considered a beis shar to that chatzer, ve'ein tzarech liten pas. They don't have to give pas. 1 and 3, they're batei shar, they don't give pas. V'hem tzoi, house number 2 in the middle, hu bayis shemanichim b'erev. That's the house that you're putting the erev in. Ve'ein tzarech liten pas, and they also don't have to give pas. Says the Mishnah Berurah Cotton Aleph. Psukim zeh lozeh. These 3 houses are open to each other. The chatzeres are open to the houses. The houses are open to each other, and the 2 outside houses are open to the chatzerim that are next to them. The kamash balon, the chiddush over here is, even though all over the golden rule is, if one house, one resident doesn't contribute to the erev, that house is of course aser. The gam and he also asers on all the other b'nei chotzer because he's a separate entity. Hacha, in this case, Yitzuyar, it is possible that none of these 3 houses have to give to the Erev. And still they won't aser on everybody. Everybody will be mutter. Going, for example, for example, in the case that we just described, the 2 chatzeros put their Erev in the middle. Now the 3 houses in the middle, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, don't have to contribute, and they don't aser on anybody. The 2 chatzeros are mutter in all 3 houses. What the Mechaber means to say is, shehem mutarim l'taltal ba'oser habotim. The 2 chatzeros are allowed to be betaltal in the 3 houses. V'habotim bahen, and the houses are allowed to be betaltal in them. Even though they did not contribute to the erev. Ice cut and gimel. What's the explanation for why the 2 outer houses don't have to contribute? Choshev leikabei shar, because each house that's adjoining a chotzer is considered the beishar to that chotzer. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Acharei shebnei chotzer meilichen eruvan derech aleha leemtzois. The Mishnah Berurah gives us a little bit of an insight of how this works, why they're considered to be a beishar. And if you take a look at Sharet Zion, Ois Cotton Aleph, the Chavetz Chaim gives us a little bit more insight why he felt he has to explain this. Says the Chavetz Chaim in Sharet Zion, Ois Cotton Aleph, we're not talking about a traditional Beis Shar, right? A traditional Beis Shar is you have a chotzer, there's a gatehouse at the opening of the chotzer. That's a traditional Beis Shar. And it doesn't have to contribute to the Erev because it's not a real dira. Why isn't it a real dira? Because the rabbim is always going through. But that's not what we're talking about here. Here we're talking about a chotzer and a house that's adjoining the chotzer. Now it's true, the chotzer opens to the house and the house opens to the middle house. But how did the house become a Beis Shar? Says the Sharet Zion, even if this house that adjoins the chutzner is a private house, and during the week, the residents of the chutzner don't have steady permission to go traipsing through the house whenever they want. It's a private domicile. How did it become like a derech harabim? How did it become a beis shar? Says the Chavetz Chaim, afilu hach, kevan sheinichu es erev b'bayis ha'emtzoi, since the residents of house 1 and the residents of house 3 allowed the chatzeros to go through their houses to place the erev in house number 2 in the middle, well, we know that the essence of an erev, the underpinning of an erev, is our pas is in house number 2. That means we live in house number 2. We need to be able to have access to our pas. So that means that for the purposes of Shabbos and the purposes of Eruv Chatzeros, you are granting us permission to go through your house to access our pas in house number 2. Well, in that case, for Shabbos, and in the context of Hilchos Eruv Chatzeros, you became a beis shar. Al korchach nisratzu abotim shemishnei atzadin laver derech aleim b'Shabbos kishayirtzu lechol ha'erev. That means you gave us permission to use your house on Shabbos to access the erev. You now became a beis shar. Going back to the Mishnah Berurah, so the Mishnah Berurah is cut in Gimel said, since the people in the chatzeros are going through the outer houses to put their erev in the middle house, and the outer houses have allowed them to do this, that makes them a beis shar. Now we have a very interesting Magen Avram. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'yeshe kasvu. There are those that write, and this is the Magen Avram, v'yeshe kasvu. To hu adin, the Mechaber gives us the case where Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov don't have to contribute. The Mechaber very carefully gives us the case where the erev was placed in the middle house. And we just explained how it works. Magen Avram says, even if the erev is placed somewhere else, the halach is still going to be the same. Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'hu adinim nasdu shneim ha'erev be'echad mibatim hasmuchim l'chatzeros. The Magen Avram says the same halacha would be true if the erev was placed in house number 1 or house number 3. Again, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov would not have to contribute. Or even a bigger chiddush, says the Magen Avram. Let's say the erev was not put by Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov at all. The erev was not placed in the middle houses. The erev was actually placed in one of the other houses in one of the chatzeros. Maybe it was put in Ruvain's house in Chatzarei. Says the Magen Avram, oy be'echad mishar batim sheb'shtei chatzeros. Or maybe it was put in one of the houses in one of the other chatzeros. The same halacha is still true. Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov don't have to contribute. Elu hashloisha batim ein tzrichim litein erev. Why? Denasu kulam beis shar la'oisa chatzer. Because think about it. Let's say the erev was put in house number 1. Okay? It was put in Avram's house. The middle, from the 3 middle houses, the one that adjoins Chatzar. That's where the erev was put. Well, in that case, when Chatzar B put the erev in house number 1, that means that they're going to go through house number 3, that's alongside them. Then they're going to go through house number 2 in the middle, and they're going to go into house number 1 to access their erev. Well, in that case, house number 3 and house number 2 are now a beis shar to get to that house. They're becoming a beis shar to that house. And if the erev is put in Ruvain's house in Chatzar A, well, in that case, house 3, house 2, house 1 are all batei shar for Chatzar B to go access their erev in Ruvain's house in Chatzar A. We can see this in the Shar Tzion, Ois Katan Gimel, where he says, Zal tam al tzior hasheni. When the Mishnah Berurah spells out over here that the 3 houses become a beis shar for one of the chatzeros, that's the explanation for the second scenario of the Magen Avram. If the erev was placed in Ruvain's house in Chatzar A, so then the 3 middle houses of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov become a beis shar for that Chatzar, because that's how Chatzar B goes to Chatzar A to access their erev. So they go through number 3, then to number 2, then to number 1, into Chatzar A. 3, 2, 1, they're now beis shar for Chatzar A. So the words of the Mishnah Berurah explain the second scenario of the Magen Avram. Says the Sharitzino, Batzira Rishon, Sheinichua Erev B'bayis Hasamach L'Chatzer. In the first scenario of the Magen Avram, where let's say the Erev was put in house number 1 that adjoins Chatzer A, Hatam, then the rationale why Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov don't have to give is the Oisad Shnei Batim Peturim, 3 and 2 are mutter Neshehein Beishar L'Oisay Bayis, because they're a Beishar to 1. And house number 1, Pater Gam Kain, because it's the bias Shemenichim by Ha'erev. Finally, the last Mishnah Berurah over here in this sif, Mishnah Berurah is cutting Daled. Ve'ein tzarich litain pas, the house that in the Mechaber's case, with the Erev was put in house number 2. House number 2 is the Bayis Shebenichem Baya Erev, and he doesn't have to give. Ein tzarich litain pas, kemavur b'siman shin samach vav sif gimel. Let's move on to sif beis. Now, in sif aleph, we just had an interesting concept. So in sif aleph, we have the 2 chatzeres, the 3 houses in the middle that we called Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and we introduced the concept that the 2 outer houses that are between the 2 chatzeros become the Beishar, they become the gatehouse for the chatzeros that they are adjoining to. And therefore, they do not have to contribute to the Eruv chatzeros. The middle house becomes the Bayis Shemenichem by Ha'erev from each chatzer. Each chatzer is depositing their pas in that middle bias. So when we look from the perspective of either one of the chatzeros, what we see is chatzer, beishar, bayis shemenichem bayis erev. Chatzer, beishar, bayis shemenichem bayis erev. Now it's sif beis, which is a very interesting sif. It's very cryptic. There's no Mishnah Berurah on it. Chavetz Chaim remained silent on this sif. Happens to be a complex piece of Gemara in Masechtas Eruvin. Let's take a look at the sif. Shtei chatzeros. Here we're going to have 2 chatzeros. Ushnei batim beinehem. And now there are going to be only 2 houses between the 2 chatzeros. V'loi ervu yachad. And these 2 chatzeros are not attempting to join in a joint eruv chatzeros, ella rather kol achas la'atzma. The 2 chatzeros wish to remain independent from each other, and they want to make their own eruv chatzeros. Now, before we go weiter in the Mechaber, I think it's kedai to take a look at a little bit of a diagram here and to attempt to do some of the math that would pertain to this case. Let's move this up a little bit. Okay. So, all right. Here we have your 2 chatzeros, right? You have chatzer aleph, right? What I would usually call chatzer A, but for some reason I wrote chatzer aleph. And you have chatzer beis over here. As you can see, each one of the 2 chatzeros has multiple houses in it. So each one is a bona fide chatzer. In between them, there are 2 houses, bayis aleph, bayis beis. Chatzer aleph opens up into bayis beis opens up into bayis aleph opens up into chatzer beis. Now, when it comes to these chatzeros, making an eruv chatzeros, there are a lot of different ways that this can play out. Let's remember, the houses that are in the middle, they open up onto both chatzeros. So they could choose to make an eruv chatzeros with one of them and not the other, right? So let's play it out. Let's say bayis aleph and bayis beis both decide that they want to be able to go here on Shabbos. There's a good Pirkei Avos drasha in Chatzer Beis. They want to be able to take their Pirkei Avos, Keli Sheshavas Babayis. They want to be able to bring it to the Chatzer and Chatzer Beis. And the good Kiddush is also in Chatzer Beis. Chatzer Aleph, nothing going on in Chatzer Aleph. So Bayis Aleph and Bayis Beis have no desire to be part of the Erev in Chatzer Aleph. They want to be part of the Erev in Chatzer Beis. Well, according to all the halachas that we learned earlier, they have the option to do that. They could be ma'ariv with Chatzer Beis, and they're not going to aser on Chatzer Aleph because this guy has a doorway this way, he has a doorway that way. If he's not hergol to go this way, if he's not in the habit of going this way, so the door will be closed. We'll consider these two houses part of this chutzner. Chutzner Beis will have a big Eruv Chatzeris together with Bayis Aleph and Bayis Beis, right? They'll all join together in one Eruv Chatzeris. Chutzner Aleph will make their own Eruv Chatzeris. It could also play out the other way. Maybe Bayis Aleph and Bayis Beis want to join Chutzner Aleph. It could go in that direction too. There are other ways that this could play out as well. Maybe Bayis Aleph wants to join Chutzner Beis, Bayis Beis wants to join Chutzner Aleph. So there are a lot of different ways that this can play out. I hope I'm correct, I think that the case that the Mechaber is trying to address is where Bayis Aleph and Bayis Beis want to go in both directions, which is fine. When you have a house that's located between two chatzeros, it could join two Eruv Chatzeros. They could join Chutzner Aleph's Eruv Chatzeros. They could also join Chutzner Beis' Eruv Chatzeros. Now, if that happens, so Bayis Aleph and Bayis Beis will have all their options open to them. They could go wherever they want. Chutzner Aleph and Chutzner Beis will be independent from each other. Now, of course, it gets a little bit more complicated than that because it's going to depend where the Eruvin are actually located. But in a very basic case, right? Let's say Chutzner Aleph made their Eruv Chatzeros and the pas is going to be in this house. So, okay, Bayis Aleph, Bayis Beis will contribute pas to Chutzner Aleph. The Chutzner is in this house. They're part of their Eruv Chatzeros. They could take Caleb Sheshavsu Babayis, transfer it to Chutzner Aleph. Keli Sheshavas B'Chutzner and Chutzner Aleph could come into either one of their two houses. They also want to join Chutzner Beis. If the Eruv is in this house over here, no problem. They'll also contribute pas to this Eruv. And again, they could take Kelim Sheshavsa Babayis, bring them to Chutzner Beis. They could take a lawn chair from Chutzner Beis and bring it into their houses. They have that option. Now, I think in this Sif Beis, that's what Bayis Aleph and Bayis Beis were trying to do. What they're trying to do is they want to join both Eruv Chatzeros. But here's the kunz. They want to join each one of the Eruv Chatzeros, but they don't want to contribute pas to anybody. Now, how are they going to get away with doing that? I'll tell you how they get away with doing it. Remember what we learned at Sif Aleph? Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the houses that are between the two Chatzeros, they're going to try to pull the same spiel over here. So they learned Dirshu Mishnah Berurah. They did Shinai Tes Sif Aleph. They thought that they got a good chap from Sif Aleph, but they forgot Sif Beis. Here's what they tried to do. What they tried to argue was like this. Chutzner Aleph is going to make their Eruv Chatzeros, including Bayis Aleph and Bayis Beis, but they're going to put their pas in Bayis Aleph. Okay? What does that mean? They're going to consider Bayis Aleph to be one of the batim of one of the houses of their chutzner, right? Well, why not? They have doorways going all the way through. They could claim Bayis Aleph is one of the batim in their chutzner. So fine. So this house, they're going to take pas. They're going to go through Bayis Beis. They're going to deposit the pas in Bayis Aleph. Now, does Bayis Aleph have to contribute to this Erev? No. Why not? Because it's the Bayis Sheminichim Bayis Erev. So Bayis Aleph is off the hook. How about Bayis Beis? Well, they want to argue that Bayis Beis, or at least Bayis Beis wants to argue, that they're also off the hook. Why? What do you mean? I'm a Beis Shar. I'm the gatehouse of Chutzner Aleph. Just like in Sif Aleph, the house adjoining the Chutzner is the Beis Shar. A Beis Shar doesn't have to give to the Erev. So Bayis Aleph is saying, I'm the Bayis Sheminichim Bayis Erev. Chutzner Aleph is putting their Erev by me. I don't have to give to the Erev. Bayis Beis is saying, I'm the Beis Shar. After all, when Chutzner Aleph wants to go out to Bayis Aleph to get their Erev, they're coming through me. When they want to go back, they're coming through me. I'm a Beis Shar. Beis Shar doesn't have to give. So Chutzner Aleph's Erev is going to be pas from this house, pas from this house, no pas from this house, no pas from this house. Sounds like maybe it's a good argument. All right, hold that thought. What's Chutzner Beis going to do? Now remember, they want to join Chutzner Beis' Erev also. Chotzer Beis is going to make the same argument. Chotzer Beis is going to say, well, I have to give pas. I have to give pas. We're going to take our Erev, we're going to put it here because they want to join our Erev also. So we'll give pas. Bayis Beis won't give pas to my Erev because what do you mean? It's the Bayis Sheminichim Bayis Erev. Bayis Aleph is not going to give pas to this Erev because what do you mean? I'm the Beis Shar. So Bayis Aleph is going to pater itself from giving pas to Chotzer Aleph Erev because he's going to say I'm a Bayis and I'm the Bayis Sheminichim Bayis Erev. Bayis Beis is going to excuse itself from giving pas to Chotzer Beis' Erev because what do you mean? I'm the Bayis Sheminichim Bayis Erev. But at the same time, Bayis Beis is also going to argue that they don't have to give to Chotzer Beis' because that they don't have to give to Chotzer Aleph because I'm a Beis Shar. Bayis Aleph is going to argue that they don't have to give to Chotzer Beis because I'm a Beis Shar. Says the Gemara, hold on. What are you? Are you a Beis Shar or are you a Bayis? Right? Look at it from the perspective of each house. Bayis Aleph, what are you? You want to excuse yourself from giving to Chotzer Beis' Erev because you're a Beis Shar? Okay, so you're a Beis Shar. All right. But you want to excuse yourself from giving to Chotzer Aleph because you're a Bayis. Because you're a Bayis Sheminichim Bayis Erev. No. You can't be a Bayis and a Beis Shar. Because after all, Bayis and Beis Shar are a stira. The reason a Beis Shar does not have to give to an Erev is because it's not a diurin, it's not a dira, it's not a bias, it's a walkthrough, it's a Beis Shar. You can't claim that you're a Beis Shar in the context of one chotzer, and you're a bias shebenicha bias erev from the other chotzer. So says the Mechaber, in this case, if the two middle houses do not contribute to the erev is off. In Sif Aleph, you have three houses in the middle, there's no stira. In that case, the middle house is the Bayis Sheminichim Bayis Erev. The other two houses are each a Beis Shar. But there's no stira. Over here, there's a stira. You want to call Bayis Aleph a Beis Shar for one chotzer, a Bayis for the other chotzer. You want to call the other house a Beis Shar for one chotzer, a Bayis for the other chotzer. That, says the Mechaber, you cannot do. Says the Mechaber inside, Shtei Chatzeros u'shnei batim beineihem. You have two Chatzeros with two houses in between them. V'loi ervu yachad. They're not joining in a joint Eruv Chatzeros. Ela kol achas la'atzma. Instead, each Chatzer wants to make their own independent Eruv Chatzeros, but the middle two houses want to join both. Uba ben Chatzer zeh derech bayis etzloi. So the Chatzer on one side went through the house that adjoins it, and put their Erev in the house that adjoins the other Chatzer. The other Chatzer did the same thing. They also went through the house that adjoins them and put their Erev in the other one. There's no Erev. Because what's happening is each Chatzer is putting their Erev in the house that's called the Beis Shar for the other Chatzer. You can't put an Erev in a Beis Shar. So make up your mind. Are you a Bayis or are you a Beis Shar? That's the way the Gemara couches the Shaila, by the way. The Gemara couches the Shaila. Can you be a Bayis for one Chatzer and a Beis Shar for the other Chatzer? The Gemara says, no, you can't do that. And that's exactly what's going on over here. Okay? Again, very interesting sif. And Mishnah Berurah, silent. Very, very interesting. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. The schus of Liman HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should send Yeshuas, Refuas, Parnaset, Sheduchim, to those in need. We should be zeicher to see the B'yeskel Tzedek, B'mher V'yameinu. Amen. Be well.